here's my story of the haunted house I lived in for 7 years. And let me tell you, it was more than enough. My mother met her ex-husband in 2002, and she got pregnant. They decided we should move into his house, located in a small village with just a few houses. We moved in around February or March 2003. The day we moved in, everything seemed fine. We met his 2 daughters, their sweet dog, and a cat. Felt like a blissful family. We had a picnic and were having a good time. His daughters, who were grown up, went back to their homes. That night, my older brother and I were getting ready to sleep in the same room while my mother and her boyfriend went to get more stuff from our old apartment, leaving us alone. The first 20 minutes were fine, but then we started hearing creaking noises on the wooden steps. We stared at each other, wide-eyed, wondering what it was. My brother got up to check but found nothing. When he came back and got under the covers with the lights off, the noises started again. We stayed awake until about 4 a.m. before finally falling asleep. A couple of months later, when our half-brother was a few months old, we had a family gathering. We were all at the table except for the baby, who was sleeping. We were talking and laughing when suddenly my mom patted me on the shoulder and asked, "Did you see that? Are you seeing things?" She was looking up the stairs where the bedrooms and bathroom were. I told her I didn't see anything. Then we heard the baby crying. My mother, too terrified to check, sent her boyfriend. He calmed the baby down and came back to the table. I asked my mom what she saw. She hesitated but then told me she saw a woman in white with blonde hair floating from their bedroom, where the baby was sleeping, to the bathroom. I hadn't seen anything and told her she was freaking me out. She brushed it off, saying she might have had too much to drink, even though she hadn't because of breastfeeding. She told her boyfriend, who was a skeptic, but he took her to a psychic who said there was a demon in their bedroom. Fast forward 2 to 3 years later, they got married. Everything was fairly quiet by then. My mom had to pray a specific prayer 3 times a day. Suddenly, the activity started to escalate. I became the center of attention. I was 16 when it started. First, I had constant nightmares every night. Then I began waking up at exactly 3:14 a.m. every morning for 6 months. Then it started pulling my blankets off of me, and I was literally wrestling for them. I said, "Can't you give me a break and do this to my brother instead?" It listened, and it did. It started pulling the blankets off my brother too, and he started complaining in the mornings. I eventually told him what happened. He said I was mean, but we laughed it off. One night, we were woken up by a loud bang in our room. We turned on the light and searched for the source but couldn't find anything unusual, so we went back to sleep. In the morning, my brother asked if I had read his book last night. It was one of the thick Twilight books. I said no, and he explained that the books were on the shelf and couldn't have fallen off because they were so tightly packed. We realized that must have been the source of the bang. My brother was speechless. A few months later, another incident occurred. I was in the bathroom downstairs, and my brother was in the bathroom upstairs, the one the ghost went to when my mom saw her and the one attached to our bedroom. Suddenly, I heard the front door of the house opening and closing, and then I heard almost a whisper outside my bathroom door in my mother's voice, "Hey, call your brother." I replied that he was upstairs and she could call him herself. The voice repeated, "Hey, call your brother," more forcefully and urgently. I agreed, then heard the front door open and close again. I finished in the bathroom and told my brother that our mom needed him. As I finished telling him, my mom came in and asked where my brother was. I told her I had informed him she needed him. She looked at me wide-eyed and said she had been in the vineyard the whole time and hadn't been in the house. We were both terrified. The next day, my mom asked if I had called her by her name. I told her I had just come out of my room and always called her Mom, not by her first name. She said the voice came from the living room, not upstairs. After that, things mostly quieted down except when we occasionally slept in that room during visits. My brother and I eventually moved out. 5 or 6 years later, I came home for a week. The room my brother and I had slept in was now a storage room, so I had to sleep on the couch in the living room. Whenever I finished my shower and needed to dry my hair, the hairdryer was in that room, right beside the door on the floor. I could easily reach it with my hand, but something always prevented me from grabbing it. I was filled with dread and didn't want to step into that room, so I called my mom to get it for me. She laughed at me for being ridiculous, but I still wouldn't do it. There's something so dark in that room that I do not dare even look into it. Hello students. If you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing to my channel. I noticed that a lot of you who watch my videos aren't subscribed. Subscribing helps you stay updated with my latest videos and supports the channel, allowing me to create more awesome content for you. Thanks for watching. I grew up in a small First Nations reserve in Northwest BC, Canada. Over the years, several events ranging from mildly odd to downright frightening occurred in our home. Around 2001 to 2002, I would return home alone from school as my father was working on housing construction on our lower reserve areas. My sisters were also gone, one working at our local gas station, and the other with her boyfriend up north with his family. My mother was away attending a bachelor's degree program in a city nearly 600 kilometers away. When I got home from school, I would immediately feel a sense of dread and unease, as if someone was unhappy about my presence. Often, I would leave the house and hang out with one of my cousins, either at their place or outside in the woods. When that wasn't an option, I would gather my dog or one of our 2 cats and head straight to my room, trying to ignore anything that happened. We had 4 gray chairs with small wheels, and I would often hear them rolling by themselves in the kitchen and dining room area. My sisters and cousins also had their fair share of scares in the house. It seemed like everyone except my dad was affected by the strange happenings. One night, while trying to sleep, I got that familiar feeling of unease and dread. I opened my eyes and saw my oldest sister standing in my doorway. I asked her what she was doing, but she didn't answer. I yelled, "What the hell do you want?" Still no answer. Finally, I said, "Go away. Go back to bed." She turned around and went back to her room. The next day, she had no recollection of this event. It was either my sister or something that wanted to imitate her, both equally scary. Many strange occurrences happened before my mom returned home with her bachelor's degree a couple of years later. However, one incident that stuck with me happened just after she came back. I was in my middle sister's room while my sister was getting a stern talking to by my mother about boundaries with her boyfriend in our home. I was standing next to my sister's boyfriend, facing my mother and sister on the bed. Out of nowhere, 2 very long, bony fingers came through a hole in the wall and started feeling around. The fingers were bony, very large, and a sick purple color. After a few seconds, the fingers retracted back into my room. My sister's boyfriend and I ran into my room within seconds, but there was nobody there. My mom, being very spiritual, blessed our home with smudging and placed shot glasses filled with water and sea salt on every windowsill. Despite her efforts to restore normalcy, the salt in my eldest sister's room turned black. My childhood home wasn't the only house on our reserve to experience strange occurrences, and ours was far from the worst. When the GT Railway came through our reserve in the early 1900s, the rail company and the Canadian government made our band members move our graveyard and bodies, issuing $5 per moved member and $20 for a higher-ranking person's grave. This happened again when the highway was put through during World War II. Between these events and the extreme trauma some band members took home from residential schools, I believe negative energy feeds whatever is stirred up around here. Even now, the odd thing or two still happens around my own place, even though my house is new with no prior occupants. I've been wanting to share some experiences my family and I have had dating back to the mid-1990s. For context, I'm the oldest of 4 sons, and we all grew up in a small 3-bedroom home in a quiet subdivision surrounded by wilderness. My parents bought the house in 1982, and they still live there today. I come from a superstitious and sensitive family. Most of us seem to be in tune with our extrasensory perception. While I don't consider myself psychic, I have been aware of unexplainable presences or feelings. My mother explained that before she became pregnant with me, she never really noticed any strange or paranormal occurrences at home. When she got pregnant, things changed. She started feeling a presence while at home. My father's work had him gone for weeks at a time, leaving my mom feeling lonely and overthinking at night. While trying to sleep, she felt like someone was in the room with her. She said it wasn't an ominous or negative energy, but rather the opposite. As her pregnancy continued, small objects started vanishing and reappearing. Wind-up toys and toys activated by buttons, which she had placed on a shelf in a closet, ended up on the closet floor, activated and playing. She even saw a female figure move from one room to another in the upstairs hall. My mom wanted to understand why the house had all these paranormal energies, especially since it was newly built, not even 20 years old at the time. The previous owner was a single parent, but she never knew the age or gender of the children. My mom started having complications with the pregnancy, and I was born 9 weeks premature. I spent the first 6 months of my life in the hospital dealing with issue after issue, but I managed to pull through. While this isn't related to the paranormal, it's important context for later events and theories. When I was a few months old, a pair of hats my mother and great-grandmother wore to a wedding somehow got moved from the attic storage into my mom's closet. This spooked my mom momentarily, but by then she had come to terms with sharing space with some sort of friendly spirit or presence. These things didn't bother her too much, and besides that, not much else happened. One of the strangest but most powerful things that happened in my childhood home took place when I was still very young. Even though I was 8 months old, I couldn't roll myself over very well or even sit up. My mom was home alone with me and put me down for a nap. She went to lay down in her bedroom across the hall, and sleep quickly took over. She had vivid dreams of being in a bright white room, standing in place. She felt a welcoming presence she had felt before, but then a more ominous feeling showed up, like impending doom. She heard the voice of a girl saying, "The baby! It's the baby!" The voice repeated itself as she jolted awake. Sensing something was wrong, she rushed across the hall to my bedroom and found me face down in the crib's mattress. I had somehow moved myself around but was unable to push my face out of the mattress. Ask my mom the story now, and she'll tell you with great detail how real the dream felt and how scary it was. As I got older, around 3 or 4, I started chatting with an imaginary friend. I would spend a lot of time in my room, having full-on conversations with no one. When my parents asked who I was talking to, I told them her name was Tara. I said she was a little girl, a bit older than me, and that she was nice. I kept this up for years. By the age of 8 or 9, I understood that our house had spirits in it, but I was raised to believe they were harmless and just there with us. It didn't scare me. What scared me instead were sudden loud noises and movies about vampires. Fast forward to my teenage years. One Friday night, I was sleeping, and across from my bed was a large dresser with a longer but shorter dresser beside it. I remember waking up from a strange dream and seeing a young girl with dark hair and clothes that looked like they were from decades prior sitting on my dresser, looking at me. I jumped out of my skin because, honestly, who expects that? I believe it was Tara. I've seen her a few other times, or possibly another female spirit. When I visit my parents now, I sometimes get the same intense feeling, like I know one of these spirits is around and welcoming me back. If I'm the first to arrive home, the whole feel of my surroundings changes. Especially in the basement, I'll see a dark female figure move across the back of the room, reflected off the glass paneling of my parents' bar, moving into the laundry room and disappearing. I've seen it in reflections of windows upstairs, standing in various spots around the home, as if they're just sharing space with me, trying to say hi. Now that I'm 30, I still have paranormal experiences in every apartment I've lived in. Nothing horrifying, thank goodness, but always something. Maybe I'll share some of those moments another time. I truly believe that not all aspects of the paranormal are spooky and scary. Sometimes they're just strange, but they can also be wholesome and enlightening. I believe we share our lives with others who have passed on and who just want to make themselves known from time to time, maybe to watch over us. Who knows? It's complex, but I do believe I have had ghosts follow me around all my life. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, a series of events happened that still scare me today. It started on a cold autumn evening when my grandmother and aunt were suddenly rushed to the hospital. Both were very sick, and since I had a slight fever, my parents decided it was best for me to stay home. It was my first time being home alone. To pass the time, I decided to play video games in my room. As the game grew more intense, I noticed my dog, Bella, barking outside the living room. She was usually very calm, so her barking was unusual. I called out to her, trying to soothe her, but she wouldn't stop. Growing frustrated, I walked over to the living room to see what was wrong. Bella stood at the window, staring into the darkness, barking non-stop. I couldn't see anything outside, so I gently pulled her away and closed the curtains. She whimpered but eventually followed me back to my room. I had barely settled back into my game when a loud crash came from the living room. Bella's barks turned into desperate cries. My heart pounded as I dashed back, fearing the worst. The living room was a complete mess. The furniture was overturned, picture frames were shattered, and the once cozy space now looked like a storm had hit it. Bella stood in the middle of the chaos, her tail between her legs, whimpering. Panicked, I grabbed the phone and called my parents, stumbling over my words as I tried to explain what had happened. They didn't take me seriously, saying I must have imagined it. When they returned home, they were shocked by the mess but couldn't find any explanation. They cleaned up the room in silence, and we never spoke of that night again. Life went back to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Over the years, strange things continued to happen. Objects moved on their own, whispers echoed through empty rooms, and cold spots appeared randomly throughout the house. My parents dismissed these occurrences, but I couldn't ignore them. One night, years later, I was home alone again. My parents were out of town, and I had just turned off the lights to go to bed. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. As I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a faint scraping sound coming from downstairs. I froze, straining to hear. The scraping grew louder. My mind raced, recalling the night of the living room chaos. Summoning my courage, I crept downstairs, armed with a baseball bat. The kitchen was bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. The sound was coming from the pantry. As I approached, the door suddenly swung open with a force that knocked me back. A cold wind rushed past me, chilling me to the bone. Inside the pantry, a shadowy figure stood, its form barely visible but undeniably present. It seemed to be made of darkness itself, with eyes that glowed a sinister red. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as the figure slowly advanced toward me. Bella, who had been hiding behind me, started barking furiously. The figure paused, as if acknowledging her presence, then vanished into thin air. The room fell silent once more, save for Bella's frantic barking. I fled the house, clutching Bella tightly, and ran to a neighbor's. They called my parents, who returned home immediately. Once again, my story was met with disbelief. They chalked it up to stress and imagination, but I knew better. Since that night, the strange occurrences have only intensified. Doors slam shut on their own, voices whisper my name, and shadows move where there should be none. I am constantly on edge, always waiting for the next inexplicable event. Despite my parents' disbelief, I began researching the history of our house. I discovered that a previous owner, a man named Samuel, had mysteriously disappeared many years ago. Some locals believed his spirit still lingered, unable to move on. Others whispered that darker forces were at play, drawn to the house by some unknown force. Now, every night is a test of my resolve. I lay awake, listening to the house creak and groan, waiting for the next sign that Samuel, or whatever else is haunting our home, is still with us. The fear is a constant companion, a reminder that some things are beyond explanation and that the past is never truly gone. I lived in an apartment complex about 11 years ago. Other than some terrifyingly large wolf spiders, I never experienced anything paranormal. But then, one weekend, the old man who lived across from me had a party. His brother attended and, tragically, died from alcohol poisoning. His body lay there for over 12 hours because everyone thought he was just sleeping it off. After his death, I occasionally heard odd sounds, but nothing major. Then one night, while lying in bed with my toddler, something strange happened. I was waiting for her to fall asleep when suddenly, the light shining into the room from the bathroom was blocked. I whipped my head up and saw a black mass, roughly in the shape of a person, standing in the doorway. My whole body tingled with fear. I squeezed my eyes shut, unsure if it was a real person who had broken in or something paranormal. When I opened my eyes again, the figure was gone. I jumped out of bed, grabbed my shotgun and a couple of shells, and took off after it. The only door into the apartment still had both locks secured, and the chain was in place. Windows were closed and locked. I checked under every bed and inside all the closets but found nothing. The noises continued after that night, but I never saw the figure again. My lease was up a couple of months later and I moved out, but the story didn't end there. In my new place, everything seemed normal at first, but soon, I started noticing strange occurrences similar to what happened in the old apartment. Objects would move on their own, and doors would creak open without explanation. One night, as I was putting my daughter to bed, I felt an icy hand brush against my arm. I spun around, but no one was there. Weeks passed, and the incidents grew more intense. My daughter began talking to someone invisible. She would giggle and converse as if someone was in the room with her. When I asked who she was talking to, she simply said, "The nice man." Chills ran down my spine every time. One evening, after putting my daughter to bed, I heard faint whispers coming from her room. As I approached the door, I heard a deep, unfamiliar voice mixed with my daughter's. I burst into the room, but no one was there except my daughter, sound asleep. Determined to understand what was happening, I did some research on the old apartment complex. I discovered that several unexplained deaths had occurred there over the years. Many residents reported seeing shadowy figures and hearing strange noises. Some believed the complex was built on cursed land, while others thought restless spirits haunted it. One night, as I was sitting in the living room, the lights flickered and the temperature dropped suddenly. The black mass reappeared, hovering in the hallway. This time it was clearer, almost solid. I could see the outline of a face, twisted in anguish. It slowly drifted towards me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Desperate, I reached out to a local paranormal investigator. She visited the apartment and conducted a thorough investigation. She confirmed that a spirit was indeed attached to me and my daughter, likely the brother of the man who died in the old apartment. She performed a cleansing ritual, but warned that the spirit might not leave easily. In the weeks following the cleansing, the activity lessened, but didn't completely stop. We still hear whispers and occasionally see the shadowy figure. The investigator told me that some spirits are bound to the living by unresolved issues or strong emotions. She advised me to speak to the spirit, to tell it that it's okay to move on. One night, I gathered the courage to do just that. I sat in the living room, lights dimmed, and spoke aloud to the spirit. I told it that it was no longer welcome in our home and that it needed to find peace. As I spoke, a sense of calm washed over the room. The shadowy figure appeared one last time, standing in the hallway. It seemed less menacing, almost sorrowful, before slowly fading away. Since that night, the activity has ceased. My daughter no longer talks to the nice man, and our home feels lighter, more peaceful. I learned that sometimes the past lingers in unexpected ways, and confronting it head-on is the only way to move forward. If you want more stories like this, please subscribe to my YouTube channel to be updated in my latest uploads. Thank you for watching.